Listen here, chosen one. Stop everything for a moment and focus completely, because if you're watching this video right now, at this exact point in time, it is not by chance. What I'm about to reveal explains why the last few days have felt heavier than usual, why your energy has been shifting without a clear reason, and why something you did recently triggered a response you were never meant to see directly. Exactly 72 hours ago, something happened that most people would have overlooked entirely. You didn't announce it. You didn't mark it as important. You may not have even remembered it afterward, but it was noticed. Not by the people around you, not by anyone who knows you personally. It was witnessed by those who have been quietly monitoring your path for a long time. And this time, they couldn't stay silent. Because there comes a moment in certain lives when observation alone is no longer sufficient. When what someone does crosses from being noted into being recorded. You felt it, even if you couldn't name it. That strange awareness following you. That sense of being evaluated without pressure. That quiet exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from transition. This is not fatigue from doing too much. It's the weight of visibility without announcement. Here's what you need to understand. For a long time, your actions were being watched without reaction, without feedback, without confirmation. That was intentional. But what you did recently changed the nature of that attention. You chose alignment again, but this time without effort, without hesitation, without internal debate. And that confirmed something irreversible. It confirmed that you are no longer acting correctly because you are being tested. You are acting correctly because it is now who you are. That distinction is everything. And when that distinction becomes clear, silence becomes impossible. Because witnesses are only present when something is worth remembering. This video exists because that moment has already passed, and now the consequences of that witnessing are beginning to unfold around you. Before we go any further, do this. Write 777 in the comments if you know that something in your life has shifted recently in a way you can't fully explain yet. And if this message feels uncomfortably precise, subscribe now and turn on notifications. These files are released in sequence. Missing one will leave gaps you'll feel later. Now listen carefully, because once witnesses begin speaking, even quietly, the path does not return to silence. There is a fundamental misunderstanding that keeps most people confused about why their lives unfold the way they do. They assume attention arrives first, that recognition precedes responsibility, that support comes before endurance. But the structure governing certain lives operates in the opposite order. Witnesses do not appear at the beginning of a path. They do not arrive when someone is uncertain, reactive, or still negotiating with their own values. They appear only after alignment has been demonstrated without supervision. For a long time, you lived without confirmation. You acted correctly without praise. You restrained yourself without reward. You chose discipline without anyone reminding you to, and nothing happened. No immediate breakthrough, no external validation, no visible shift. That silence was not absence, it was filtration. Because alignment must prove that it is not conditional. Anyone can behave well when pressure is high and eyes are watching. Anyone can appear disciplined when consequences are immediate. But alignment that matters is what persists when there is no incentive to maintain it. That is what you were being observed for. Not whether you could make the right choice once, but whether you would make it repeatedly, even when it cost you comfort, speed, or recognition. This is why guidance remained indirect for so long. If intervention had arrived early, it would have corrupted the data. You would never have known whether your restraint came from fear, conditioning, or genuine internal order. So the system withheld response, and you continued anyway. That is the part most people miss. You didn't stop doing the right thing when it felt pointless. You didn't abandon your center when no one reinforced it. You didn't become reckless just because silence followed your effort. That persistence without feedback is what moves observation into witnessing. Because witnesses are not there to teach you how to act. They appear only once it is clear that teaching is no longer required. This is why your recent action mattered, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was automatic. You did not deliberate. You did not struggle internally. You did not argue with yourself. You simply acted in alignment again, as if there were no alternative. And that revealed something irreversible, that your values are no longer situational. They are structural. At that point, the purpose of testing expires. There is nothing left to measure. Correction would be redundant. So instead of pressure, something else begins. Documentation. Witnesses do not interfere. They do not advise. They do not accelerate outcomes. They record that an individual can now be trusted with consequence. Because once alignment stabilizes, influence expands naturally. Influence does not require permission. It emerges, and when it does, it must be accounted for. That is why witnesses appear late. That is why they remain silent. And that is why they do not announce themselves when they arrive. Their presence is not meant to motivate you. It is meant to confirm that motivation is no longer necessary. This also explains why validation felt delayed throughout your life. You were not being ignored. You were being spared premature reinforcement. Reinforcement too early creates dependence. Dependence weakens internal authority. You were being allowed to develop authority without applause. And now that authority has stabilized, which is why observation changed form, which is why silence shifted texture, which is why something that felt like pressure before now feels like weight. Not burden, weight. The weight of being carried forward instead of held back. Witnesses are present because your path no longer needs correction. It needs containment. And containment only happens when alignment has proven it can exist without supervision. That phase is complete. What comes next is not louder. It is more consequential. When witnessing begins, the most important changes do not happen around you. They happen within you. This is where many people misunderstand the shift. They expect external signs, visible rewards, clear signals that something has changed. But witnessing is not designed to impress the outside world. It is designed to reorganize the inside. For a long time, your inner world operated in a state of vigilance, not anxiety, vigilance. You were alert, careful, constantly measuring your responses. You questioned your decisions, replayed conversations, wondered whether you were being too strict, too patient, too silent, or not enough. That inner monitoring was part of the testing phase. It kept you aware. It kept you restrained. It kept you from drifting into impulse. But once alignment stabilizes, that constant internal checking becomes unnecessary. And that is the first thing that changes. You may have noticed it as a strange quietness in your mind. Not emptiness, not numbness, quiet. Thoughts no longer collide the way they used to. Internal arguments resolve faster, or don't arise at all. Decisions feel clearer before logic fully engages. This is not intuition suddenly appearing. It is noise disappearing. Because witnessing confirms that you no longer need constant self-surveillance. Your values are no longer fragile. They don't require guarding every second. So the system relaxes internal pressure. That relaxation feels unfamiliar at first. You may have mistaken it for lack of motivation, or emotional distance, or even disinterest. But it is none of those things. It is integration. Earlier, you were holding yourself together deliberately. Now, you are held together naturally. That distinction is subtle and powerful. You also may have noticed that certain emotional triggers lost intensity. Things that once irritated you now register briefly and pass. Comments that once lingered in your mind no longer echo for hours. Situations that once demanded reaction now feel optional. This is not avoidance, it is emotional sovereignty. When someone is no longer being tested, their reactions stop being data points. There is no longer a need to provoke you to see what happens. so provocation loses relevance. That is why you feel less reactive without trying to be calm. Calmness is not being imposed, it is emerging. This is also why self-doubt has begun to loosen its grip. Not disappear entirely, that would be unrealistic, but its authority has diminished. Earlier, doubt felt like a warning system. Now, it feels more like background noise. It still exists, but it no longer dictates your movement. That is because witnessing stabilizes identity. You are no longer asking, "Am I allowed to be this?" You are simply being it. This internal stabilization also changes how you relate to effort. You may have noticed that forcing things feels heavier now. Not morally wrong, physically heavy. Pushing conversations, pushing timelines, pushing outcomes. Your system resists that pressure. Because when alignment is internalized, effort becomes secondary to timing. Effort is no longer how things move. Accuracy is. This is why waiting now feels different than it did before. Earlier, waiting felt like delay, like being held back. Now, waiting feels like positioning. You sense that acting too early would distort something, that silence is doing work you don't need to manage consciously, that understanding is not intellectual, it's embodied, and embodiment is the hallmark of witnessing. When alignment lives in the body, not just the mind. This is also why your relationship with approval has shifted. You still appreciate respect, you still value connection, but you no longer need affirmation to stabilize your sense of self. Compliments don't inflate you. Criticism doesn't destabilize you. They pass through. That neutrality is not indifference. It is centeredness. Earlier, external feedback mattered because it helped you calibrate. Now, calibration is internal. You know when something fits. You know when something doesn't. You don't need consensus. And this internal clarity has another effect. It reduces attachment. Not attachment to people, attachment to outcomes. You care, but you don't cling. You invest, but you don't chase. You engage, but you don't grasp. That balance only emerges when someone is no longer being tested for impulsivity, because grasping was one of the things being measured, and you passed. So the impulse to force fades. This is also why fear feels different now. It hasn't vanished, but it no longer paralyzes. It informs rather than controls. Fear becomes data, not directive. That shift alone marks the end of the testing phase, because fear-driven behavior is unpredictable. Alignment-driven behavior is not, which is why witnessing changes the inner landscape first. It creates stability where effort once lived, clarity where vigilance once lived, trust where doubt once lived. And that internal change sets the stage for everything external that follows. Because once the inside reorganizes, the outside has no choice but to respond. That response is already happening, quietly, systematically, and it becomes visible next. When witnessing begins, the outer world does not react emotionally. It reorganizes structurally. This is a critical distinction. People often expect visible rewards, dramatic shifts, or sudden breakthroughs. They look for signs that announce progress, but the systems surrounding your life do not announce changes. They adjust conditions. That adjustment is already happening. You may have noticed it first as timing. Events that once collided now sequence themselves. Conversations that used to escalate now resolve quickly or never begin. Situations that once dragged on now end decisively. This is not luck, it is efficiency. When someone is no longer being tested, resistance becomes wasteful. Systems apply resistance only where it produces learning or correction. Once learning stabilizes, resistance withdraws. And that withdrawal looks like cooperation. Not dramatic cooperation, subtle cooperation. You see it in how obstacles dissolve before becoming problems, in how delays shorten without explanation, in how access appears without negotiation. Earlier, you had to push. Now, placement matters more than pressure. This is also why certain opportunities began appearing without effort, not because you chased them, but because your position became visible. Visibility does not always mean being seen. It means being recognized by function. Systems identify where something fits and route accordingly. You are being routed, which is why some doors open quietly, why others close without resistance, and why you no longer feel compelled to force entry. This reorganization also affects people. Some respond with attraction, others with discomfort. Neither response is personal. Aligned presence destabilizes misaligned dynamics. People who rely on reaction, chaos, or emotional leverage lose footing around you. They don't know why, they just feel it. So they adjust, they become cautious, they withdraw, they soften their tone. They choose words carefully, not because you intimidated them, because their usual strategies no longer work. You don't react predictably anymore. Predictability is leverage, and leverage is what many social dynamics depend on. When leverage disappears, the dynamic collapses. That collapse looks like distance. It also looks like curiosity. Some people begin watching you more closely, not openly, quietly. They ask indirect questions. They reference you in conversations you're not part of. They reassess assumptions they once held confidently. This is not admiration, it is recalibration. They are updating their internal model of who you are, because the old model no longer explains your behavior. This is also why people who once underestimated you now speak differently about you. They don't praise you publicly. They don't admit they were wrong, but they stop dismissing you. They adjust language. They change tone. They avoid absolutes. That is acknowledgement without confession. It is the most common response when witnessing begins. The environment also reorganizes through reduction. Certain recurring problems stop repeating, not because they were solved, but because they are no longer compatible. Patterns that relied on your previous reactions cannot sustain themselves, so they dissolve. You may have noticed fewer emotional loops, fewer recurring arguments, fewer situations that drain energy without resolution. This is not because you became passive, it is because alignment no longer feeds those loops. Loops require engagement. You disengaged, not consciously, but structurally, which is why those patterns faded. Another effect of witnessing is compression. Outcomes arrive faster. Not always better, faster. Clarity replaces prolonged uncertainty. Decisions conclude rather than linger. This can feel unsettling at first, because uncertainty was familiar. But compression is not chaos. It is resolution, and resolution conserves energy. You are no longer spending months processing situations that used to take weeks. You are no longer revisiting the same emotional terrain repeatedly. This is not emotional numbness. It is decisiveness without conflict. The world also begins to mirror your restraint. People escalate less around you. Situations de-escalate naturally. You may notice fewer confrontations, not because people agree with you, but because confrontation no longer yields anything. Your silence does more than argument ever did. That silence is not avoidance, it is signal. It tells the environment that chaos will not be rewarded with attention, and environments adapt quickly to that rule. This is also why coincidence feels different now. Earlier, synchronicities felt surprising. Now they feel expected, not in an arrogant way, in a grounded way. You sense that things are lining up because alignment is present, and alignment organizes probability. That is not mystical, it is structural coherence. Coherent systems attract compatible elements and repel incompatible ones. That is exactly what is happening around you. The world is not becoming easier, it is becoming cleaner. Cleaner interactions, cleaner outcomes, cleaner endings. And clean endings are as important as clean beginnings, because they prevent residue. Residue is what kept you tired before. Unfinished loops, unresolved tension, lingering doubt. Witnessing removes residue, not instantly, progressively, which is why exhaustion is giving way to steadiness, and why your energy feels different, less scattered, more contained. This is not an ending, it is a reconfiguration. And reconfiguration requires something from you, because once the world reorganizes, responsibility shifts. That responsibility is what the final part addresses. When witnessing begins, the most dangerous mistake is misunderstanding what this phase is for. Many people assume this is the moment to accelerate, to expand outward, to finally claim visibility. That assumption ends more paths than failure ever does, because witnessing is not permission to rush, it is confirmation that precision now matters more than effort. Earlier in your life, mistakes were part of the process. They corrected you, they slowed you down when you moved too fast. They taught you through consequence. Now, mistakes operate differently, not louder, heavier. Not because you were punished more harshly, but because your influence has expanded beyond yourself. What you allow now echoes further. What you tolerate now shapes structures, not just experiences. What you choose now sets direction, not just mood. This is why restraint becomes essential at a higher level. Not restraint born of fear, restraint born of awareness. You are no longer being tested for impulse. You are being trusted with impact. And impact demands stewardship. Stewardship of attention. Stewardship of energy. Stewardship of access. Not everyone deserves proximity anymore. Not because you are superior, but because misaligned access introduces distortion. Distortion forces correction. Correction reintroduces resistance. And resistance is no longer required here. This is why silence becomes more powerful than explanation. Earlier, explanation helped others understand you. Now, explanation weakens clarity. You do not need to narrate your choices. You do not need to justify your pace. You do not need to defend your boundaries. Those behaviors belong to a phase where identity was still forming. Your identity is now stable, which is why your silence carries weight. It is not absence, it is authority. Authority that does not argue. Authority that does not persuade. Authority that simply holds position. This phase also demands patience of a different kind. Not the patience of waiting for something to happen, the patience of allowing what is already happening to unfold without interference. You may feel urges to accelerate, to force clarity, to demand outcomes, to push timelines. Those urges are natural. They come from old conditioning that equated effort with worth. But here, effort applied prematurely fractures alignment. Alignment responds to readiness, not pressure. You are not meant to chase what is already orienting toward you. Chasing creates distortion. Distortion invites resistance. Resistance interrupts flow. Flow is not speed. Flow is accuracy. This is also why comparison becomes dangerous now. Earlier, comparison helped you calibrate. It showed you what was possible. It motivated growth. Now, comparison introduces noise. Your path is no longer parallel to most people's. Comparing would distort timing. You were not prepared for speed. You were prepared for stability under movement. That distinction matters because stability allows sustained motion without collapse. This is also the phase where humility becomes essential. Not humility that shrinks you, humility that keeps you accurate. Accurate about what you carry, accurate about what you don't, accurate about what is yours to hold and what is not. You are not meant to do everything. You are meant to do what aligns. Alignment will narrow your options. That narrowing is not loss. It is focus, and focus is protection. This is why certain desires have begun to fade, not because you settled, but because they no longer fit. You are shedding ambitions that were fueled by proving rather than purpose. That shedding creates space, space for precision, space for clarity, space for sustainable movement. Witnessing does not elevate ego, it elevates responsibility, and responsibility requires consistency without supervision. You are trusted now because you demonstrated that you can self-govern. Do not abandon that discipline. Do not dramatize this phase. Do not announce it prematurely. Let alignment continue doing what effort used to do. Because once witnessing begins, the path does not disappear. It clarifies, quietly, relentlessly, with intention. Remain grounded, remain selective, remain accurate, and allow what has already been recorded to unfold. Because what is unfolding now is not preparation, it is positioning. And positioning, once established, does not reverse, it simply continues.